You were never in control. And that terrifies you. Because somewhere deep in your bones you've built your identity around the illusion that if you just tried hard enough, planned well enough, held on tightly enough, you could stop the chaos. But life, like a river, was never meant to be held in place. The more you grasp, the more it slips through your fingers. This is the pain of resistance. And Alan Watts saw it clearly. He didn't come to liberate you by giving you more rules or teachings or steps to master. He came to say, stop trying so hard. You are not a machine that needs fixing. You are not a project that needs managing. You are a wave on the ocean, pretending to be separate. The moment you try to stay afloat by clinging to certainty, you sink. Because the water, the life you fear, is the very thing that holds you up when you finally let go. Watts called this surrender. Not a weak giving in, but a graceful bow to the truth. That existence is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. And yet we fight it. We make enemies of our emotions. We resist endings. We fear change like death itself. But what if letting go is not the end of something, but the beginning of seeing clearly? What if all the things you've been trying to control were never yours to hold in the first place? There's a quiet freedom in that realization, not because you give up, but because you wake up. Watts reminds us that to resist change, to try to cling to life, is like holding your breath. If you persist, you kill yourself. Letting go is not about passivity. It's about alignment with the flow, with reality, with the deeper intelligence of nature that moves through all things. And when you stop resisting, something strange happens. You don't disappear. You become more real, more alive. The anxiety loosens, the fear dissolves, and in its place is a soft, radiant emptiness, a presence that cannot be named, only felt. This is not philosophy for the intellect. This is medicine for the soul, and it begins with one act of courage, to stop swimming against the current, to finally and fully let go. We spend our lives building walls, not with bricks, but with beliefs. Beliefs about who we are, what should happen, what must never happen. We wrap ourselves in identity like armor, terrified that without it we'll vanish into meaninglessness. But Alan Watts saw this armor for what it is, a prison. The ego, the isolated I that we cling to so desperately, is not our true self, but a mask we forgot we were wearing. And behind that mask is something vast, fluid, and free. Watts warned us that when we identify solely with the ego, we cut ourselves off from the whole. We try to become the master of life rather than a participant in its dance. We treat our thoughts as commands and our plans as destiny. But life does not obey our expectations. It unfolds, like music, in its own rhythm. And here's the great irony. The more we try to control the music, the more we lose its beauty. We stop hearing the melody because we're too busy demanding it follow our beat. This is the root of our anxiety. We are constantly trying to manage what is unmanageable, our future, our feelings, other people, even death. But Watts points to an ancient wisdom. The way forward is not through grasping, but through yielding. Like bamboo in the wind, we bend, we sway, we flow. And in that flow, we rediscover something forgotten, a sense of connection, of peace, of being carried by something greater than ourselves. To let go of control is not to fall into chaos. It is to return to the real order, the deeper harmony that was always there. But to do this, we must first become aware of how tightly we're holding on. Ask yourself, what idea about yourself are you most afraid to lose? What future are you clinging to with white knuckles? What are you resisting that might actually be the very thing you need to feel whole? Watts doesn't ask you to abandon your humanity. He invites you to stop pretending you are something separate from the universe. You are not a detached observer. You are part of the symphony. And when you remember this, not as a belief but as a felt truth, you begin to hear the music again. Not as something outside you, but as something you are. We fear change because we mistake permanence for safety. But Alan Watts reminds us that permanence is an illusion, a trick of language and memory. Everything flows. The river is never the same river, and you are never the same person. And yet we fight this natural flux with everything we've got. We try to hold on to relationships, careers, identities, and even pain as if they were lifelines in a sea of uncertainty. But clinging does not keep us safe. It only makes us suffer. Watts taught that change is not the enemy. Resistance to change is. In the same way that waves rise and fall, so too do our emotions, our experiences, and our sense of self. To resist the wave is to drown beneath it. To move with it is to surf its crest. But this requires a radical shift in how we relate to life. Instead of asking, "How do I control this?" we ask, "How do I participate in this?" This shift is not intellectual, it is existential. It is the shift from fear to trust, from contraction to openness. And it begins with surrender, not a passive giving up, but an active letting go. A willingness to be with what is, even if what is feels uncomfortable, unknown, or painful. When we stop demanding that life match our ideas, we begin to see the beauty in its imperfections. We begin to understand that nothing is missing except our presence. Most of our suffering comes not from what happens, but from the mental war we wage against it. We narrate, judge, resist, and ruminate. But if we silence that commentary even briefly, something sacred reveals itself beneath the noise. Watts called it the eternal now, the timeless present in which life actually unfolds. Not yesterday, not tomorrow, but now. And in this now, if we are truly present, we find peace not by avoiding change, but by flowing with it. We realize that the self we're trying so hard to protect is not solid, but fluid. Not a noun, but a verb. You are not a thing, you are a happening. And when you stop trying to freeze the unfolding, you begin to feel your true nature. Ever-changing, deeply connected, and mysteriously free. There is a kind of wisdom in the heart that the mind cannot grasp. Alan Watts spoke often of this paradox, the difference between knowing about life and actually living it. We are trained to analyze, dissect, define. We label experiences as good or bad, successes or failures, and believe that if we just think hard enough, we can solve the riddle of existence. But the mystery was never meant to be solved. It was meant to be lived. And this is where our suffering often begins, in the refusal to be intimate with the unknown. We are terrified of not knowing. We want explanations, guarantees, a sense of control. But what if the most important truths are beyond language? What if they can only be felt, like music, or silence, or love? Watts suggested that we step away from the compulsive need to figure it all out and instead immerse ourselves in direct experience. Taste the food, hear the rain, breathe the air, feel the emotion without naming it. And in doing so, we return to something deeper than intellect. We return to awareness. Not the kind of awareness that observes from a distance, but the kind that merges with the moment. A kind of participatory consciousness. Here, we no longer ask, "What does this mean?" but instead ask, "How does this feel?" And in that question lies freedom. Because the mystery, once embraced, stops being threatening and becomes beautiful. Like watching fog roll over a mountain, or the way the ocean disappears into the horizon. You don't need to explain it, you just need to be with it. This is not laziness or passivity. It is a deeper form of engagement, one rooted not in control, but in presence. And in presence, you start to realize that life is not a problem to be solved, but a dance to be danced. You cannot think your way to inner peace, because peace is not an idea. It's a way of being. It's the soft letting go of the mind's grip on certainty. It's surrendering the urge to dissect and choosing instead to dissolve into the experience of being alive, not knowing where it will lead, not needing to, trusting that the heart knows what the mind does not. Letting go is not something you do. It's something that happens when you stop holding on. Alan Watts was clear about this. The more you try to force surrender, the more entangled you become in the illusion of control. Surrender cannot be willed because the very act of willing is resistance. It's the ego asserting itself, trying to manage its own disappearance. But letting go is like sleep. You don't fall asleep by trying, you fall asleep by ceasing to try. In the same way, spiritual surrender arises when you stop interfering, when you become aware of your resistance without fighting it, and in that awareness, something softens. Watts often compared life to water, fluid, yielding, yet powerful. Water doesn't resist, it flows. It adapts to the shape of its container. It moves around obstacles, and in time, it wears down even the hardest stone. So too must we learn to be like water, to bend when we want to break, to flow when we want to freeze. But we've been taught that strength means tension, that control is power. And so we grip tighter. Our identities, our plans, our relationships, our beliefs. We become rigid in our need for certainty, and in that rigidity we suffer. But imagine, for a moment, what it would feel like to not need to manage everything, to no longer defend who you are, to no longer demand that life give you answers. There is a peace in that space, a deep, quiet strength that doesn't come from domination but from allowance. Watts called this the backwards law, that the more you pursue something, the more you chase it away. The more you struggle for happiness, the more miserable you become. The more you cling to life, the more it slips through your fingers. But when you stop trying to possess it, it opens itself to you, just like love, just like joy, just like truth. Letting go, then, is not about abandoning life. It's about becoming intimate with it, trusting that you don't need to fight the current to reach the shore. You just need to stop thrashing. Let yourself float. Let the river carry you. The wisdom of life is already moving through you. You only need to stop resisting and listen. There's a strange fear that creeps in when we think of letting go. A fear that if we surrender, everything will fall apart. That without constant vigilance, our lives will unravel, our identities dissolve, and we'll be left with nothing. But Alan Watts argued that this fear is the great illusion. What falls apart is not your life, but your illusion of control over it. What dissolves is not yourself, but the mask you wear. You don't disappear when you let go. You appear for the first time. The authentic self emerges when the performance ends. And the performance is always rooted in fear. Fear of rejection, fear of insignificance, fear of not being enough. So we hold tightly to our roles, our narratives, our plans. But these are like costumes in a play. When the play ends and the curtain falls, you step off the stage, and that's when real life begins. Watts encouraged us to see life not as a problem to be solved, but as a dance to be enjoyed. In a dance, you don't strive to reach a final pose. The whole point is the movement itself. Likewise, the purpose of life is not to arrive somewhere, but to be here, now, present, fully awake to the mystery of what is. The mind, however, is addicted to destination. It wants security, structure, guarantees. But the soul doesn't speak in straight lines. It speaks in circles, in silence, in symbols. To hear it, you must fall into the quiet spaces, the liminal moments where nothing is defined and everything is possible. This is what Watts meant when he said the mystery of life is not a puzzle to be solved, but a reality to be lived. And this mystery doesn't demand answers. It demands participation. The ego resists because it cannot dominate what it cannot understand. But your deeper self does not need to understand, it simply needs to trust. And in that trust, you find a freedom the ego could never give you. The freedom to live without guarantees, to love without possession, to walk into the unknown and feel, somehow, at home. Letting go, then, is the path back to wholeness, not by adding more, but by releasing the need to grasp it all. What if the greatest spiritual mistake is trying too hard to be spiritual? Alan Watts warned against the trap of spiritual ambition, the desire to attain enlightenment as if it were a trophy to be won, a level to be unlocked, a badge that certifies your superiority. But this, he said, is just the ego disguised in sacred robes. The moment you try to become spiritual, you've already missed it, because you've placed a future goal between yourself and what's already present. Real spiritual awakening doesn't come through effort. It comes through insight, through seeing the futility of effort. It arises not from striving, but from stopping. You don't climb a ladder to reach your soul. You fall back into it. You don't need to transcend the human experience to be whole. You need to inhabit it fully. Watts likened this to the man who sits in a boat trying to push the water with an oar to make it flow faster. The river already moves on its own. Your frantic effort doesn't help. It only creates turbulence. In the same way, life flows, consciousness flows, awakening flows. But when you try to push it, you interfere with its rhythm. Letting go of effort is not passivity, it's alignment. It's dancing with the flow, rather than fighting against it. Many seekers get trapped in a cycle of self-improvement, always trying to fix themselves, heal themselves, become better versions of themselves. But this often comes from a subtle form of self-rejection, as if who you are now is unacceptable. Watts would say, stop, breathe, look around. There is nowhere to get to. You are already it. The treasure you seek is hiding in the act of seeking. Drop the need to become and simply be. This doesn't mean you stop growing, but that your growth emerges from wholeness, not deficiency. You begin to evolve not because you're broken, but because you're alive. That is a radical shift. The paradox is that true change begins when you stop trying to change yourself. When you surrender the obsession with becoming someone else, you find the one you were always meant to be. And that, Watts believed, is the essence of spiritual freedom. Not the attainment of something new, but the rediscovery of something ancient, something forgotten, something that was never separate from you at all. If you want to control something, Alan Watts said, control your breathing. And then notice how even that slips out of your hands. The breath comes and goes like the tide, like thought, like life itself, rising, falling, returning to stillness. Watts pointed to the breath not just as a biological act, but as a metaphor for existence. You don't own your breath. You don't force it. You participate in it. And so it is with being. The illusion of control is comforting, but it is just that, an illusion. We cling to plans, identities, relationships, beliefs, all in a desperate effort to make life safe and predictable. But life laughs at blueprints. It breaks them with a storm, a phone call, a diagnosis, a death. And when it does, the false ground we built beneath our feet vanishes. That moment, though terrifying, is also sacred, because it's the moment we touch what's real. In surrender, Watts taught, we don't collapse into despair. We wake up. We stop fighting gravity. We stop resisting what already is. We become, as he described, like a cat that falls out of a tree, not flailing but relaxed, allowing the fall to carry it safely to the ground. The art of living is not about clinging, it's about trust. But trust doesn't mean naivety, it means courage. It means the willingness to feel, to risk, to be vulnerable in a world where nothing is guaranteed. Watts believed that the deepest wisdom was not found in answers, but in trustful openness to uncertainty. Let go of the script, he said. Let go of needing to be right, to be safe, to be perfect. Instead, meet life as it is, fluid, unpredictable, alive. When you do this, even your suffering transforms. It no longer feels like punishment, but like part of the dance, an essential note in the music of your becoming. The rain is not a mistake. The fall is not failure. The unknown is not your enemy. Life is not a problem to be solved, but an experience to be lived fully, consciously, courageously. When you breathe with it rather than against it, you discover that peace isn't on the other side of control. It's on the other side of surrender. And in that surrender, you don't disappear. You return. You come home to yourself. Not as someone who owns the moment, but as someone who belongs to it. There is a silence beneath all the noise, and Alan Watts believed that silence is not empty. It's full of presence, full of being, full of the infinite mystery we keep trying to escape with our thoughts. In our culture, we treat silence like a void, something awkward, uncomfortable, to be filled immediately with chatter, entertainment, or distraction. But Watts turned this upside down. He taught that silence is not the absence of meaning. It's the space where meaning is born. In the same way that music depends on the quiet between notes, or that form depends on space, so too does the richness of life depend on our capacity to enter into stillness without fear. Most of us are terrified of that stillness because it strips away our illusions. In the silence, there is no one to impress, no past to rehearse, no future to control. There is only what is, raw, immediate, and vast. But if you can stay with it, if you can remain in that presence without flinching, something remarkable happens. You begin to feel your life from the inside. You begin to hear not just the external world, but the pulse of your own soul. Watts often described this as becoming aware of awareness itself, noticing the noticing, listening to the silence behind sound. This is not mystical fluff, it's direct experience. And in that experience, there's a shift. You stop identifying with the little voice in your head and begin to rest in the awareness that hears it. You are no longer just the storm. You are the sky that holds it. This doesn't mean you become detached or indifferent. Quite the opposite. You become more intimate with reality because you're no longer trying to manipulate it. The silence becomes a mirror, and in it you see not who you think you should be, but who you are, formless, open, and inseparable from everything else. From that place, compassion arises naturally. So does wonder. So does peace. Watts said that real silence is not just an absence of sound. It's the letting go of struggle, the falling away of effort, the resting in presence without needing to change anything. In that silence, you remember what the mind forgets, that you are not a fragment but part of the whole, and the whole, in its stillness, is always whispering to you. At the end of the search, there is nothing to find, because what you were seeking was never separate from you. This was Alan Watts's final gift, the realization that the path to peace, meaning, and enlightenment is not about gaining anything, but remembering what you are. The truth isn't hidden in some distant realm or buried in a future achievement. It's here now in this breath, in this moment, in the very act of looking. All spiritual seeking is like a dog chasing its own tail. The more you chase, the more you run in circles. Watts urged us to stop running, to stop grasping, to simply sit, breathe, and become aware of awareness itself. The moment you stop demanding that life give you something, it gives you everything. The paradox is that when you let go of the need to control, to fix, to possess, you find a wholeness that was never missing, only overlooked. You don't need to transcend the human condition. You need to fully enter it, feel it, accept it, laugh with it, cry with it, dance with it. Watts often reminded us that life is not a journey with a goal, but a play, a dance, a song. You don't listen to music to get to the end. You listen because it's beautiful now. In the same way, you are not here to arrive at some final perfection, but to awaken to the miracle of being itself. The art of letting go is not about withdrawal from the world, but an intimate participation in it without clinging. It's standing in the storm without resistance. It's saying yes to the mystery, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Because pain, too, is part of the music. So is joy. So is loss. So is birth. The whole thing is sacred if you stop trying to make it sacred. In the end, Alan Watts didn't leave us a system, dogma, or a map. He left us a doorway, a turning of the mind, an invitation to trust the river of life and let it carry us home. Not to some other place, but to this ordinary, radiant, infinite moment where nothing is missing and everything is already okay. Let go. Just let go. And in that release you will find not the end, but the beginning of peace.